The city was almost asleep when the tall glass building still shone against the night sky. Inside, only a few lights remained on in the upper floors where cleaners moved quietly, their footsteps echoing down empty corridors. It was past 10 and most employees had already gone home. The building belonged to one of the biggest companies in the city, a place of ambition, long hours, and polished suits. At the very top floor, the CEO's office still glowed softly. She was sitting by her desk, typing away with the same focus she was known for. To most of her employees, she was a figure to admire and fear at the same time, young, smart, and strict. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened. Her name was Hannah Lee, and tonight, like most nights, she worked alone. Outside her office, the sound of the cleaning crew was faint but steady. She liked the quiet hum of the vacuum and the soft squeak of mops against the marble floor. It reminded her that even when she stayed late, life still moved around her. She rubbed her temples, closed her laptop, and finally decided to leave. When she stepped out of her office, the hallway lights dimmed automatically to a softer glow. Her high heels clicked gently as she walked toward the elevator. But before she reached it, she heard something unusual, a sound that didn't belong in a corporate building. It was music. Faint at first, like a whisper carried on air, but clearly there. She paused, listening. A melody floated through the still night, delicate and emotional. The sound came from the lobby downstairs. She frowned, wondering if someone had left a radio on. Curiosity got the better of her. She took the stairs down instead of the elevator, following the tune. The closer she got, the clearer the melody became, slow, graceful, and familiar. She recognized it after a moment. It was Nocturne in E-flat major by Chopin, one of her favorite pieces. When she stepped into the lobby, the sight made her stop. The janitor, a man in his late 50s, dressed in the company's gray uniform, was mopping the floor in slow, practiced movements. His back was slightly bent and his face showed lines of quiet age. But what caught Hannah's attention wasn't the mop in his hand. It was the way he was humming. He wasn't just humming randomly. Each note matched Chopin's music with surprising precision. His tone was soft but sure, like someone who truly understood the melody. For a moment, Hannah simply watched him. The lobby was wide and empty, the large windows reflecting the man's movements as he worked alone. The soft hum filled the silence in a strangely beautiful way. She finally spoke. "You know Chopin?" The man looked up, startled, almost dropping the mop. When he saw who it was, his eyes widened slightly. "Oh, good evening, ma'am. I didn't hear you come in." Hannah smiled faintly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just didn't expect to hear Chopin in the middle of the night from the janitor." He chuckled, a gentle, humble sound. "It helps me keep time," he said. "Each piece has its own rhythm. Keeps the night from feeling too long." She tilted her head. "You sound like someone who knows music." He shrugged, his eyes returning briefly to the floor. "Maybe a little. I used to play long ago." "Play?" she asked. "What do you mean, like a hobby?" The man smiled faintly, not with pride, but with the quiet tone of someone remembering another life. "The piano," he said simply. "I taught music once." Hannah blinked, caught off guard. She didn't know what to say for a moment. The idea of this quiet man pushing a mop in her company's lobby, once being a teacher or a pianist, felt strange, even unfair. "You taught music?" she repeated softly. He nodded. Before life took a turn. There was a silence between them, the kind that isn't uncomfortable, just full of unspoken things. The faint hum of the air conditioner filled the background as Hannah looked at him more closely. There was something steady in his eyes, something that didn't match the job he was doing now. "Without thinking," she said, half-jokingly, "if you can really play Chopin like that, I'll marry you." She had meant it as a light tease, the kind of humor she rarely allowed herself to show. But to her surprise, the man didn't laugh or look confused. Instead, he smiled in a calm, knowing way and replied, "Then I suppose you'll have to keep your word someday." For a moment, Hannah felt her cheeks warm. She hadn't expected that kind of reply. It wasn't rude or bold, just quietly confident, even a little playful. "You're not supposed to talk back to your boss like that," she said with a small laugh. "I'm off the clock," he answered gently, his tone kind. That made her laugh again, genuinely this time. The sound echoed softly across the empty lobby. For someone who carried so much weight on her shoulders, laughter felt rare. After that, she leaned against the wall, watching him mop for a moment, What happened? She asked after a pause. Why aren't you teaching anymore? He stopped for a second, the mop still in his hands. Then he sighed. My wife got sick, cancer. I stopped teaching to take care of her. Hospital bills, medicines, it all added up. When she passed away, I couldn't keep the music school running. I took whatever work I could find. Hannah felt her throat tighten a little. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He nodded as if he had heard those words many times. It's all right. My daughter's studying now. That's what matters. Something in the way he said it, calm, steady, without self-pity, made her chest ache. She had met countless executives who boasted about their hardships, but this man spoke with quiet grace, as if his pain had already been made peace with. She looked at the floor, then back at him. You must really love your daughter. I do, he said simply. She's the reason I still mop floors with a tune in my head instead of giving up. Hannah smiled faintly. And Chopin keeps you company, he smiled back. Chopin never leaves. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The soft city lights from outside spilled through the glass walls, painting silver reflections across the marble floor. It was a peaceful scene. Two people from completely different worlds sharing a quiet, honest moment at the end of a long day. Finally, Hannah checked her watch. You should get some rest soon. It's late. I will, ma'am. Just a few more minutes. She turned to leave but hesitated. What's your name? He wiped his hands on a cloth before answering. Park. Just Park. Good night, Mr. Park. Good night, Ms. Lee. As she stepped out of the lobby and into the cool night air, Hannah couldn't shake off the image of the janitor humming Chopin while cleaning the floors. It felt symbolic somehow. Beauty hidden beneath routine, talent buried under responsibility. When her car arrived, she sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. In her mind, she could still hear the faint notes of Nocturne in E-flat major, gentle, longing, full of life. That night, for the first time in a while, she didn't think about work. She thought about Mr. Park, about how strange and unfair life could be. In her world, people were judged by titles, salaries, and suits. Yet here was a man who had lost everything but still carried music inside him. When she finally went to bed, the melody still lingered in her head. It played softly as if the world itself was reminding her that worth wasn't always wrapped in status or wealth. Sometimes it was hidden in the most unexpected places, like a janitor humming Chopin in the quiet hours of the night. And though she didn't know it yet, that simple encounter, that passing joke, would soon become a story her whole company would talk about for years. The next morning, the building looked completely different. The soft lights of night were replaced by the rush of people in crisp suits, holding coffee cups and phones, walking quickly toward their offices. The same lobby that had been quiet and calm now buzzed with energy. Yet for Hannah, something about it felt changed. She walked through the glass doors as she did every day, her assistant trailing behind her, reading out her schedule. Meetings, calls, interviews, it was all the same. But her mind wasn't on the numbers or the reports. She found herself glancing toward the far end of the lobby where the janitors usually worked. The place was spotless as always. She didn't see Mr. Park anywhere, but his quiet humming from the night before still echoed faintly in her memory. She shook her head slightly and told herself to focus. CEOs didn't get distracted by janitors no matter how well they hummed Chopin. Still, that evening replayed itself in her mind all day. The calm tone of his voice, the soft humor in his reply, the sadness that lingered behind his gentle smile. During lunch, she sat in her office overlooking the city and tried to read through a proposal, but the words blurred on the page. Finally, she pressed the intercom. Could you ask HR to send me a copy of the staff list for the maintenance department? Her assistant sounded confused but replied, Of course, ma'am. When the file arrived, Hannah opened it quickly. Rows of names filled the screen. Cleaning staff, janitors, technicians. It didn't take long to find him. Park Hyun-soo, age 56. Employed for 3 years. No disciplinary records, no complaints. Always punctual. She scrolled further and found a small note from the hiring file. Former music instructor. Excellent conduct. Requested night shifts, that line made her stop. Requested night shifts? She murmured. Most employees avoided night duty, but he had asked for it. Why? The thought lingered as she closed the file. There was something about his story that tugged at her, not out of pity but out of curiosity. People like him, quiet and kind, always seemed to have the most extraordinary stories hidden behind ordinary lives. Later that afternoon, when most people had gone home, Hannah walked down to the cafeteria for coffee. The lights were dim, and only a few workers remained chatting softly. Near the vending machine, she noticed a familiar gray uniform. Mr. Park was there, carefully wiping down a table, humming again, a different tune this time, light and cheerful. She hesitated for a moment, then approached him. "Do you always hum while you work?" He looked up, surprised again, and gave a small smile. "Ah, it's you again." "I suppose I do." "Old habits," Hannah smiled. "I read your file today." He raised an eyebrow, looking amused. "That sounds serious." "Not really," she said softly. "It said you were a music instructor before. Why did you stop?" Mr. Park placed his cloth on the table and straightened up. "That's a long story, ma'am." "I have time," she said, sipping her coffee. He looked at her for a moment as if deciding how much to share. Then he nodded slowly. "I had a small music school. Nothing big, just a room with an old upright piano and a few students. I loved it. It wasn't much money, but it made me happy. Then my wife got sick. It was cancer." Hannah's expression softened. "I'm sorry," he nodded. "I tried to keep the school open while taking care of her, but eventually I couldn't manage both. Medical bills kept coming, and when she passed away, I sold everything. The piano, the classroom, all of it." He paused for a moment, his gaze distant, as if replaying a memory only he could see. "After that, I just needed work. Something steady. The company took me in as part of the cleaning crew. I didn't mind. I'm grateful for it." There was a calm honesty in his voice, no bitterness, no self-pity. Hannah found herself quiet, listening intently. "Do you still play?" she asked after a while. "Not anymore," he said, smiling gently. "My hands aren't what they used to be. Besides, I couldn't afford a piano. But I remember every note in my head. Sometimes when it's quiet like last night, I hum so I don't forget." Hannah nodded slowly. "You said your daughter's studying?" "Yes," he said, his tone brightening. "She's in university now, studying literature. I'm proud of her. She works hard, just like her mother did." Hannah smiled softly. "She must be proud of you, too." He gave a quiet laugh. "Maybe. But she doesn't like that I work nights. She worries. I tell her not to. I tell her this job is honest work. And it is." For a few seconds, neither spoke. There was something peaceful in the air. A strange comfort between two people who, on the surface, couldn't have been more different. When she finally turned to leave, Hannah said lightly, "I still remember my promise." He looked confused for a second, then chuckled. The marriage one?" She smiled. "Yes, that one." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "You have a good sense of humor, Ms. Lee." That night when Hannah drove home, she thought about how easily he laughed, how gently he spoke. Most of the people she worked with were loud, demanding, impatient, chasing deals and power. But here was a man who had lost so much and still carried peace within him. The next few days passed quickly, full of meetings and reports. Yet somehow she found her eyes drifting toward the maintenance staff whenever she passed through the lobby. Sometimes she caught sight of him, polishing the railings, his face calm and focused. Other times she only heard faint humming echoing down the hallways. One Friday afternoon, Hannah had lunch with her executive team. The talk was lighthearted. Bonuses, new partnerships, the upcoming company gala. One of her managers mentioned the entertainment plans. "The pianist we hired is quite popular," he said. "Plays classical pieces beautifully. We wanted something elegant this year." "Good choice," Hannah said absently, stirring her tea. Another manager, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "If all else fails, we can always ask the janitor to play. I've heard he's quite the musician." The table laughed. Hannah didn't. She looked up sharply, her expression unreadable. "How do you know that?" "Oh, just rumors," the man said quickly, sensing her tone. "Someone said he used to be a piano teacher. I didn't think it was true." "It's true," Hannah said quietly. The table fell silent. For a moment no one knew what to say. Then she added softly, "He's a remarkable man." They nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Hannah smiled faintly to ease the tension. and the conversation moved on, but her mind didn't. That evening, when the office emptied again, she found herself walking to the lobby. Mr. Park was there, as usual, mopping near the entrance. She stopped a few feet away. "Mr. Park," she said. He turned, surprised. "Good evening, Ms. Lee. Working late again?" She nodded. "You could say that. I wanted to ask you something." He leaned on his mop and waited. "At the company gala next month," she said slowly, "we usually have live music. Would you consider playing?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You want me to play piano? At the gala?" She nodded. "Only if you're comfortable. I just thought, well, maybe you'd like to play again." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I haven't touched a piano in years. I don't even know if I can still play properly." "I think you can," she said. "I can hear it when you hum. You still carry the music inside you." He smiled at that, a small, grateful smile. "That's kind of you, ma'am. But those events are for important people. I'm just the janitor." She looked him straight in the eyes. "You're not just anything, Mr. Park." For a moment he seemed speechless. Then he bowed slightly. "Thank you. I'll think about it." When she left the building that night, she didn't know if he would say yes. But something told her that he would. There was a spark in his eyes when she spoke. A spark of the man he used to be. The one who played Chopin not for applause but for love of the sound itself. As the elevator doors closed behind her, she smiled faintly. What had started as a teasing joke had turned into something unexpected, something real. And though she didn't realize it yet, that one small invitation would soon change not only Mr. Park's life but hers too. The day of the company gala was approaching fast. Every department was buzzing with preparations. Designers decorated the grand hotel ballroom, the catering team planned the menu, and the event planners rehearsed every detail down to the minute. The annual gala was always a big deal. An evening where the company showed its success, where everyone dressed in their best and pretended that work stress didn't exist, at least for one night. For Hannah, the CEO, the gala was another part of her job. It was where she had to smile, give speeches, shake hands, and look like the calm, confident leader everyone expected her to be. But this year felt different. Ever since that quiet conversation with Mr. Park in the cafeteria, something had been on her mind. She couldn't forget how gently he'd spoken about music, or how his eyes lit up when she'd mentioned playing again. He hadn't given her a clear answer that night. He only said he'd think about it. Weeks passed, and he never brought it up again. But each evening when she worked late, she would sometimes hear him humming softly somewhere down the hall. It always made her stop for a moment and listen. Somehow, that soft humming felt more comforting than any expensive music she'd ever heard. One Friday night, 2 weeks before the gala, she stayed in her office later than usual. Around 10, she decided to stretch her legs and take a walk downstairs. The building was mostly empty, except for the soft sounds of cleaning work. She found Mr. Park polishing the lobby floor as usual. "Good evening," she said gently. He looked up, smiling. "Good evening, Ms. Lee. Burning the midnight oil again?" "I could say the same about you," she replied with a small smile. He chuckled. "Fair point." For a moment, neither spoke. The faint sound of traffic from outside mixed with the quiet rhythm of his movements. Then she said, "I was wondering if you've thought about what I asked." He paused, resting his hands on the mop handle. "The gala?" "Yes," she said. "About playing the piano." He looked down at the floor, thinking. "I have thought about it," he said after a pause. "Many times, actually, but I'm not sure I can do it anymore. It's been so long since I played. My fingers are stiff. My memory isn't what it used to be. I'd probably embarrass myself." Hannah shook her head. "You won't. Music doesn't leave you. It stays inside, waiting for you to come back." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a poet tonight." She laughed softly. "Maybe I am. Or maybe I just believe in second chances." He sighed, looking thoughtful. "It's not that I don't want to. It's just, what if people laugh? What if they see me up there and think, what is the janitor doing on stage?" Hannah's voice softened. Then they'll learn something valuable that night, that talent doesn't care about job titles. He looked at her, searching her face as if trying to see if she really meant it. She did. He could tell. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll do it." She smiled, genuinely happy. "Good. I'll have a piano arranged for rehearsal. You can come after your shift and practice as much as you need." He bowed slightly. "Thank you, Ms. Lee." For the first time in years, Mr. Park went home that night with a spark in his heart he hadn't felt for a long time. His small apartment felt warmer than usual. When he sat by the window and looked out at the city lights, he could almost hear the piano in his head again, the notes of Chopin returning, soft and familiar. The next evening, he found the piano waiting for him in the small auditorium of the building's training hall. It was a black baby grand, polished to a mirror shine. When he lifted the cover, he felt his hands tremble slightly. It had been nearly 15 years since he'd last touched one. He sat down slowly and pressed a key. The sound was rich, clean, and deep. He smiled. Then he pressed another, then another. Within minutes, his fingers began to remember their old paths. A bit clumsy at first, but steadying with each note. He started with simple scales, then a few short pieces he used to teach his students. The sound echoed beautifully in the empty room. And then, when he felt ready, he began to play Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece he used to hum while working. The moment his fingers found the opening melody, something shifted inside him. The years seemed to melt away. The grief, the struggles, the sleepless nights. They all fell silent before the beauty of the notes. His hands trembled at first, but then they steadied, guided by memory and emotion. He didn't realize that Hannah had been standing by the door the whole time, listening quietly. She hadn't meant to disturb him. She just wanted to see if he needed help. But when she heard the first notes, she froze. It was breathtaking. The music filled the room like warm light. Every sound carried emotion, gentle, nostalgic, and full of heart. Hannah felt her eyes sting slightly. It wasn't perfect, not technically. Some notes were softer than others, some transitions uneven. But that didn't matter. It was real. It was human. When the last note faded, she stepped inside and clapped softly. Mr. Park turned quickly, surprised. "Oh, you were here?" "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said, smiling. "That was beautiful." He looked embarrassed. "It was far from perfect." "Perfection isn't the point," she said. "Feeling is. And you played with feeling." He laughed quietly. "You're too kind." "No," she said gently. "I'm honest." He bowed his head, humbled. "Thank you." From that day on, Mr. Park came to practice every evening after his shift. Sometimes he stayed until midnight. The security guards got used to seeing him leave with tired hands but a peaceful smile. Word began to spread among a few employees that the janitor was playing piano again. Most thought it was a rumor. Others dismissed it as a silly story. No one really expected anything remarkable. The night of the gala arrived quickly. The ballroom was glowing with golden lights, filled with executives, investors, and guests dressed in elegance. The soft murmur of conversation filled the air as waiters moved between tables carrying trays of wine and appetizers. A sleek black grand piano stood on stage, ready for the evening's performance. But when people learned that the pianist was the company janitor, murmurs spread across the room. "Is this a joke?" someone whispered. "Why would she let him perform?" another said under their breath. "Maybe he's good," a few said, though most were doubtful. Hannah stood near the side of the stage, watching quietly, her expression calm. She didn't care what anyone said. She believed in him. When the lights dimmed and the MC announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a very special guest tonight, Mr. Park." The room fell silent. The janitor walked slowly onto the stage, dressed neatly in a simple black suit. His hands trembled slightly, but his face was calm. He bowed politely to the audience, then sat at the piano. For a long moment, the room held its breath. Then, The first notes of Nocturne in E-flat major drifted through the air. The sound was pure and tender. Every person in the room went still, their earlier doubt melting away. The melody floated gracefully, each note falling like a quiet drop of rain. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, gentle, full of soul. As he played, memories flooded. Him, his wife smiling beside their old piano, his daughter practicing after school, the sound of laughter in the small classroom he once owned. Each memory guided his hands, turning pain into beauty. When the final note faded into silence, the room remained still for a few seconds, then erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, some even wiping their eyes. They didn't see a janitor anymore. They saw a man who had lived, loved, and still carried music in his heart. Hannah stood among them, her eyes shining with quiet pride. Mr. Park bowed deeply, emotion flooding his face. And when he looked at Hannah, she smiled, not as a boss, but as someone who understood the quiet courage it took to stand there and play. That night, the story of the janitor who played Chopin spread through the entire company. Some said it was the most moving moment in the company's history. Others said it reminded them that talent and dignity could exist in the most humble places. For Mr. Park, it wasn't about applause. It was about remembering who he was, and realizing that even after years of silence, the music inside him had never truly left. The applause lasted longer than anyone expected. For a few moments, the entire ballroom seemed frozen in time, a room full of people who had just witnessed something far more meaningful than the usual music at a company gala. When the last claps faded, Mr. Park stood slowly, bowing again. His hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from relief. He hadn't touched a piano in over a decade, yet somehow his fingers had remembered everything that mattered. He looked out at the crowd, the same people who usually walked past him without a glance. Tonight, they looked at him differently. There was warmth in their eyes, a kind of quiet respect. Some people even stood to applaud again. Off to the side of the stage, Hannah was clapping too, her face lit with a proud smile. When Mr. Park stepped down from the stage, she met him halfway. "You were incredible," she said softly. He shook his head, smiling shyly. "I made mistakes," she laughed gently. "No one noticed. You played from your heart. That's what everyone felt." He bowed slightly, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, Ms. Lee. I never thought I'd play again." "You gave me that chance," she shook her head. "You gave yourself that chance. I just reminded you who you are." For the rest of the evening, people came to speak to him. Executives, managers, even guests from other companies. They all wanted to shake his hand and tell him how moved they were. Some asked if he gave lessons. Others wanted to know his story. He answered politely, humbly, always smiling. But deep inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. When the event ended and the ballroom began to empty, Hannah found herself standing by the piano, looking at it thoughtfully. Mr. Park approached, carrying his jacket. "You've given this company something no one else could," she said quietly. "You reminded everyone what heart looks like," he smiled. "I just played a song." She looked at him. "No, you played your life." He didn't know what to say, so he simply bowed and thanked her again before leaving. That night, when he reached his small apartment, he sat by the window as always. The city lights glowed faintly, but the world felt softer somehow. His daughter called to ask how the gala went. He laughed lightly. "It went well. You played?" She asked excitedly. "I did." "And?" He smiled, looking out at the skyline. People listened. She was silent for a moment, then said, "Mom would have been proud." He closed his eyes. "I think so too." After the call, he sat quietly for a long time. Then, without thinking, he hummed the Chopin piece again. But this time it wasn't just to keep the rhythm of work or fill the silence. This time he hummed because he was happy. The next day, the company was still buzzing. Employees shared videos and photos from the gala. Clips of Mr. Park's performance spread quickly through group chats and even social media. "Can you believe the janitor played Chopin like that?" someone whispered near the elevators. "I cried," another admitted. "It was so beautiful. I didn't even know he could play. He's amazing." Even the board members mentioned it during a meeting. One of them said, "It was the most memorable gala we've ever had." Hannah just smiled quietly. She didn't take any credit. She knew all the praise belonged to him. Later that afternoon, she saw Mr. Park in the lobby. He was back in his uniform, mopping the floor as if nothing had happened. But when people passed him now, they didn't ignore him. They smiled, greeted him, even thanked him. One young employee stopped to say, "Sir, my mother watched your video online. She said your music reminded her of her father." "Thank you." Mr. Park smiled softly. "I'm glad it brought her good memories." When Hannah saw that, her chest felt warm. Something so small had changed the whole atmosphere of the building. People were kinder, softer, more respectful, all because of one man's music. That evening, she called him to her office. He looked nervous as he entered. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" She smiled. "Everything's perfect. Please sit down." He sat carefully, folding his hands in his lap. "I spoke to the board," she said. "We'd like to start a small cultural program, something that supports art, music, and creativity among our employees. And I'd like you to lead it." He blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. "Me?" "Yes, you," she said firmly. "You have a gift, and you have the kind of heart people listen to. We can use that." He hesitated. "But I don't know anything about leading a program. I'm just—" "Don't say it," she interrupted gently. "You're not just anything. You're someone who reminds people to feel. That's exactly what this company needs." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said softly, "If you believe I can do it, then I'll try," she smiled. "I do believe it." That was how Mr. Park began a new chapter in his life. The janitor who once cleaned floors now spent part of his time organizing small music sessions, lunchtime concerts, and art events for employees. He still insisted on helping the maintenance team when needed. He said it kept him humble. But now, he was also known as the company's heart. He encouraged young workers to pick up instruments they hadn't touched in years, helped shy employees find courage to sing or paint, and even taught a few to play the piano. People started to look forward to the quiet, warm presence of Mr. Park in the building, not just because he played beautiful music, but because he made them feel seen. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Hannah found herself walking through the lobby again. She stopped when she heard familiar notes coming from the corner. Nocturne in E-flat major, played gently on the new upright piano the company had installed for the program. A small crowd had gathered. Employees stood around, listening as Mr. Park played softly while one of the interns turned the pages of the music sheet. The room was filled with peace. When the song ended, everyone clapped. Mr. Park smiled and thanked them, but his eyes met Hannah's across the crowd. She smiled back, proud. After everyone left, she approached him. "You've changed this place," she said quietly. He laughed lightly. "No, ma'am. The place was fine. I just added a little sound," she smiled. "You call it sound. I call it soul." He bowed politely. "You're kind." As she turned to leave, he said softly, "You know, I still remember what you said that night." She looked back. "What did I say?" He smiled playfully. "You said, 'If you can play Chopin, I'll marry you.'" She laughed, shaking her head. "Ah, you remember that?" "How could I forget?" he said with a grin. "I played Chopin." "You didn't keep your word," she laughed again, the sound light and sincere. "You're too late, Mr. Park. I'm already married to my job." He smiled kindly. "Then I suppose that's a fair excuse." They both laughed, and for a moment, it felt like two old friends sharing a quiet joke. Before she left, she said, "I'm glad you never stopped humming," he replied. "I'm glad you listened." That night, as Hannah left the building, she paused by the glass doors and looked back at the lobby. Mr. Park was still sitting at the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys, eyes closed as he played another song. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of work pressing on her. She felt peace, the kind that comes from knowing that kindness still mattered, that real people and real stories could still move hearts even in a world of numbers and profit. And as she walked out into the cool night, she thought to herself that maybe some promises weren't meant to be kept in the way they were spoken. Maybe they were meant to remind you of something deeper, that music, compassion, and connection were the things that truly made life worth living. That night, the company building stood tall under the stars. Inside, the faint sound of Chopin drifted through the halls, gentle, timeless, unforgettable, and anyone who heard it couldn't help but smile. The weeks that followed felt different inside the company. The air seemed lighter, the faces friendlier. It was strange how one evening, one simple performance could change the way people looked at each other. Mr. Park noticed it the most. Before, people would pass him without a word, eyes glued to their phones or papers. Now almost everyone greeted him with a smile or a nod. Some stopped for a quick chat. Others brought him small things, a cup of coffee, a snack, or even sheet music they thought he might like. He didn't expect it, and he didn't need it. But it touched him deeply. His days still began early. He'd arrive before sunrise, mop the floors, wipe down glass panels, and tidy up the lobby. But now, even while doing that, he felt a quiet happiness. The same marble floors he had cleaned for years now reflected something different: respect. Sometimes, when the building grew quiet, he would sit by the piano in the lobby and play softly. Nothing fancy, just little pieces of Chopin, Debussy, or sometimes a simple lullaby he used to play for his daughter when she was small. People passing by would pause to listen for a few seconds before heading back to their desks. And every time he played, he could feel the music reaching someone, even if they didn't say it out loud. One afternoon, as he was finishing up his cleaning shift, the receptionist approached him. "Mr. Park," she said shyly, holding out a small card. "The CEO asked me to give this to you." He wiped his hands on a towel before taking it. The envelope was simple, his name written neatly on the front. Inside was a short note in neat handwriting. "Please stop by my office when you're free." "HL," he smiled softly. He had learned that when the CEO called, it usually wasn't about work. She often liked to check on the progress of the cultural program she'd asked him to lead. Later that afternoon, he made his way to her office. When he knocked, she called, "Come in." Her office, with its tall glass windows overlooking the city, felt bright and warm. She looked up from her desk and smiled. "Ah, Mr. Park, I was hoping you'd come by." He bowed politely. "You wanted to see me, ma'am?" "Yes." She gestured toward the chair across from her. "Please sit." He sat carefully, his posture straight. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "The atmosphere in the company has changed. You've done something no training session or leadership program ever could." He smiled humbly. "I didn't do much. I just played." She shook her head. "No, you reminded people what kindness sounds like. That matters." He said nothing for a moment, then replied softly, "I think people were always kind. They just needed to be reminded of it." She nodded, impressed by his words. "You're a wise man, Mr. Park." He smiled, slightly embarrassed. "I'm just old." They both laughed. After a moment, she leaned forward. "I wanted to ask about your family. You mentioned once that you have a daughter." "Yes," he said proudly. "She's studying at the university. She wants to be a doctor." "That's wonderful," she said, genuinely smiling. "She must be very proud of you." He chuckled softly. "She says she is. I tell her not to make such a fuss about her old father." "I think she has every reason to," Hannah replied. There was a pause, a comfortable silence. Then she said, "You know, I keep thinking about that night at the gala, about what you said afterward." He tilted his head slightly. "What part, ma'am?" "When you said people only hear when it's time," he nodded. "Ah, yes," she looked thoughtful. "I think you were right. Maybe I wasn't ready to listen before." He smiled kindly. "We all listen when we're meant to. Music, words, people, they come to us at the right moment." Her gaze softened. "You speak like someone who's seen a lot." "I've seen enough," he said gently. "Life teaches you slowly." She looked at him for a long moment before smiling. "I'm glad life brought you here." He bowed his head. "So am I." In the following days, the company's small music program began to grow. What started as a simple lunchtime concert turned into a weekly event where employees could share any form of art they loved: poetry, painting, dance, or music. Mr. Park became everyone's quiet mentor. He helped them prepare, gave advice, and encouraged them to overcome stage fright. He always said the same thing: "Don't play to impress. Play to express." People loved that about him. The way he made everything sound simple but meaningful. Sometimes the CEO would attend those sessions. She'd sit quietly in the back, clapping along with the others, proud of how her company was changing. Every now and then, she would glance at Mr. Park, who always stood near the piano helping someone adjust the microphone or turning the pages for a performer. She admired him more than she could explain. Not in the romantic way she once joked about, but in a deep, human way, respect mixed with affection and gratitude. One Friday evening, after the event ended and the last of the staff had gone home, She found him still sitting by the piano. "You never go home early, do you?" she teased gently. He looked up with a small smile. "It's quieter here. I like the sound of an empty room." She leaned against the piano. "You make it sound poetic." He laughed softly. "Everything can be poetic if you listen long enough." She watched him for a moment before asking, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, and when you play, who do you think of?" His eyes lowered slightly. "My wife," he said after a pause. "She loved music. She used to say that when I played Chopin, she could see colors." Hannah's eyes softened. "She must have been special." "She was," he said quietly. "She had a way of seeing beauty in everything, even in hard times. After she passed, I couldn't touch the piano for years. It felt too empty." She listened silently, her heart tightening. "But when you teased me that night," he continued with a small smile, "something inside me woke up. I realized she wouldn't have wanted me to stop. So I played again, and it felt like she was listening." Hannah swallowed, her voice soft. "I didn't know," he smiled gently. "You weren't supposed to. Sometimes life hides its lessons in small jokes." She laughed lightly, her eyes glistening. "You're turning my teasing into a life lesson now," he chuckled. "It worked out, didn't it?" They both laughed quietly, the sound echoing softly through the empty lobby. Then, after a moment, Hannah said, "I want you to know something. You've given this company a heart it didn't know it had. You've given me something too, perspective." He bowed his head humbly. "Thank you, ma'am. But I think we just reminded each other to listen." Later that night, as she drove home, Hannah couldn't stop thinking about his words. Sometimes life hides its lessons in small jokes. She smiled at the thought. It was true. What started as a careless tease had become something beautiful. She thought about all the people whose lives had been touched because one man had dared to sit at a piano again. She realized how often people looked past quiet souls, never knowing the storms or stories inside them. And she thought of how easily she could have missed meeting him if she hadn't followed that faint humming in the lobby months ago. When she reached home, she poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the city lights shimmered like stars fallen to earth. She imagined Mr. Park sitting in his small apartment, perhaps humming softly while his daughter studied. Some connections, she realized, didn't need to be romantic or grand. Some were made simply to remind you of what mattered: kindness, respect, and the quiet beauty of being human. The next morning, she arrived early at the office. The sun was still rising, casting gold light through the glass walls, and there he was, as always, mopping the floors, humming gently. When he noticed her, he smiled. "Good morning, ma'am," she smiled back. "Good morning, Mr. Park." She hesitated before adding, "You know, I was thinking about your performance that night. I don't think I ever told you how much it meant to me personally." He tilted his head, curious. "How so?" She smiled softly. "It reminded me that even when you're leading others, you still need someone to lead your heart back to what's real." He nodded thoughtfully. "We all need that sometimes." She looked around the quiet lobby and said with a small grin, "So, I guess I owe you for that." He laughed lightly. "If you insist, you can always pay me in coffee." She laughed too. "Deal." And from that day on, it became their quiet ritual. A morning coffee shared in the lobby. Two people from completely different worlds who had somehow found common ground through one timeless melody. Months passed, and life at the company settled into a calm rhythm. The laughter in the halls returned, but this time it felt more genuine. People had changed, not because of a training program or strict rules, but because they had been reminded that kindness still had a place in business. Mr. Park continued his work quietly, balancing his janitorial duties with the music program he now led. Every week there was something new: a poetry reading, a small choir performance, even a group of engineers who learned to play simple tunes together after hours. He never liked being in the spotlight, but somehow people were drawn to him. They said there was something peaceful about his presence, something that made the office feel like home. And every morning, as always, the CEO would find him in the lobby, humming softly as he polished the floors or arranged flowers in the corner vase. Sometimes she'd join him for coffee before the day began. It had become a quiet ritual that both of them looked forward to. One morning, as they sat together, she said, "You know, I think you've created something bigger than either of us expected." He smiled, stirring his coffee. "I didn't create anything, ma'am. I just played a song. She shook her head with a gentle laugh. You played more than a song. You played a truth people needed to hear. He looked at her with kind eyes. Then I'm glad they heard it. There was a short silence. The morning sun fell across the floor, glinting off the piano nearby. She glanced at it and said, Do you ever miss performing on a big stage? He shook his head slowly. No, I used to think that was success. But now I know. Real success is when your music reaches even one heart. That's enough for me. She nodded, understanding completely. After a moment, she said softly, You've changed me too, you know. He smiled humbly. I doubt that. I mean it, she said. I used to think leadership was only about making hard decisions. But now I see that it's also about listening and caring. He looked at her, smiling warmly. Then maybe we've both learned something. A few weeks later, the company hosted a charity event for local schools. It was the first of its kind, an idea that had come from Mr. Park. He had suggested they raise funds to donate musical instruments to children who couldn't afford them. The CEO loved the idea and made sure it became a company-wide effort. Everyone contributed. Some gave money, others volunteered time. Mr. Park organized a small concert for the event, inviting employees to perform. The night of the charity gala arrived. The venue was simple but beautiful, decorated with flowers and lights. Children from the nearby schools attended as special guests, sitting excitedly in the front rows. When it was time for the performances, one of the employees asked Mr. Park to play something too. He hesitated at first, but the crowd encouraged him. The CEO smiled and said quietly, One more song, Mr. Park, for the children. So he sat down at the piano again. The hall went silent. He began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece that had changed everything months ago. But this time, it sounded different, softer, wiser. There was peace in the melody, a quiet acceptance that filled the room. As he played, he glanced at the front row. The children were listening with wide eyes, completely still. And in that moment, he thought of his wife, his daughter, and the long road that had led him here. When the last note faded, the room erupted in applause. Some people even stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. The CEO walked up to him with a bright smile and said into the microphone, Everyone, this man taught us something priceless, that no matter where you start or what you've lost, your light can still shine. Let's never forget that. The audience cheered again, louder this time. Mr. Park bowed deeply, his heart full. After the event ended and the crowd began to leave, the CEO found him backstage, putting his jacket on. That was beautiful, she said. He smiled softly. Thank you. I think the children enjoyed it. They did, she said warmly. You made their night. He looked at her with gentle eyes. You made this possible, ma'am. Without your trust, I'd still be just the man who mopped the floors. She shook her head. You were never just that. You showed me that everyone has a story. We just have to stop long enough to listen. They stood quietly for a moment, the faint sound of laughter echoing from the hallway. Then, with a small smile, he said, Do you remember what you told me that first night? She looked puzzled. Which part? He grinned. You said, if you can play Chopin, I'll marry you. She laughed, covering her face for a moment. Oh no, you still remember that? How could I forget? He said playfully. That's how all of this began. She smiled, shaking her head. I suppose I should be careful with my jokes. He chuckled softly. Sometimes jokes turn into blessings. She paused for a second, looking at him thoughtfully. Well then, maybe it was meant to be. Not the marriage part, but everything that followed. He smiled kindly. I think so too. A few months later, he decided to retire from his janitorial position. His daughter had finished her studies and was about to start working as a medical intern. She begged him to rest, to take care of himself. When he told the CEO about his decision, she looked genuinely sad. You'll be missed, she said. You're the heart of this company. He smiled warmly. Hearts never really leave. They just keep beating quietly somewhere else. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. Then promise me you'll visit sometimes. I promise, he said gently. On his last day, the company organized a small farewell in the lobby. The same place where it had all started. The place where he once hummed Chopin while mopping the floors. People gathered around, clapping and cheering as he entered. Someone had decorated the piano with white lilies, his late wife's favorite flower. The CEO gave a short speech, her voice steady but emotional. This man reminded us all that every person matters, no matter what their title says. He changed our company, and in doing so, he changed all of us. We'll never forget him. When it was his turn to speak, he walked up slowly, bowing to everyone. "Thank you," he said simply. "I never thought my music would mean this much. I only wanted to make the building feel a little warmer. But you all gave me much more. Friendship, respect, and a place to belong." He paused, looking at the CEO. "And to you, ma'am, thank you for hearing my song that night. You didn't just listen with your ears. You listened with your heart." The crowd clapped softly, moved by his words. Then, before leaving, he sat down at the piano one last time. He didn't play Chopin this time. Instead, he played a gentle melody of his own, simple, honest, and full of gratitude. When the final note faded, there was silence. Then came the applause, long and heartfelt. He stood, bowed deeply, and whispered, "Thank you." That evening, as he walked out of the building, he turned back one last time. The tall glass doors reflected the golden sunset. Through the glass, he could see the piano standing quietly in the corner, bathed in soft light. He smiled. Some stories, he thought, don't end. They simply find new beginnings. Weeks later, the company launched a new scholarship program. In his name, the Park Foundation for Music and Hope. It funded music, lessons and instruments for children from low-income families. The CEO sent him a letter, along with a photo of the first group of students. At the bottom she wrote, "Your music still plays here. Always will." He kept that letter on his piano at home, right beside his wife's old photograph. Every morning before he played, he looked at it and smiled. And when he sat down at the piano, his fingers gentle on the keys, he no longer felt alone. The music flowed softly, not just Chopin this time, but something new. Something that belonged to him. Years later, whenever someone at the company told the story of how their culture changed, they always began the same way. It started with a janitor who could play Chopin, and those who heard it always smiled, because they knew that story wasn't really about music. It was about heart, about how one man's quiet melody had reminded everyone what it meant to be human.